They didn't expect her to survive, much less fight back. When a young black analyst, quiet and methodical, stepped into one of the most ruthless firms on Wall Street, no one noticed. Not really. Not the CFO who publicly mocked her in meetings, nor the colleagues who looked away as her name was stripped from project after project. She wasn't loud. She wasn't aggressive. She wasn't what they thought strength looked like. But behind every humiliation, she was watching, calculating, waiting. And when the moment came, when the pressure reached its sharpest edge, she didn't break. She exposed everything. This is a story about silence turned into strategy, about injustice sharpened into power, and about how the most unassuming person in the room can sometimes be the one holding the detonator. If you're ready for the twists, the reckoning, and the truth behind the glass towers, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and tell me, where are you watching from? And which moment made you stop and hold your breath? Let's talk in the comments. The boardroom buzzed with the ambient noise of shuffling papers and murmured anticipation, a low hum of suits settling in and caffeine kicking through veins. The Tuesday morning all-hands at Carnelian Capital was a ritual, part crucifixion, part circus. On the 49th floor of a glass and marble tower in Lower Manhattan, the room's design mirrored the people within it, cold, crisp, and expensive. Recessed lighting bathed the room in surgical brightness. It made every eye twitch, every bead of sweat on a trembling brow impossible to hide. At the head of the table, in a tailored steel blue jacket and a face honed by generational smugness, sat CFO Thatcher Vale. His wristwatch cost more than a junior analyst's salary. His mouth twisted with permanent disapproval, the corners rarely lifting unless it was to mock. His tongue was known for its precision. He could dismember a person's confidence in 3 words or less. This morning, his target was already chosen. "Let's get this clown parade moving," Thatcher announced, tossing a platinum pen onto his leather notepad. "Seneca Ray, you're up." The air changed. Subtle, but unmistakable. A few glances flicked toward the far end of the table. Seneca Ray, 24, brilliant, soft-spoken, and noticeably out of place among the ocean of white button-downs and finance pedigree, stood up with a quiet inhale. Her blouse was ivory. Her slacks were pressed. Her curls were tucked into a low, careful bun. She carried herself like she knew she didn't belong, but refused to shrink because of it. She adjusted her laptop cable to the projector. Her screen blinked onto the massive monitor behind her, clean, minimal ready. "Thank you, Mr. Vale," she said, voice clear though small. "I'd like to present the forward risk assessment model for the Everlock acquisition." Thatcher leaned back in his chair with a smirk. "Of course you would. But before we get another TED Talk on synergy, I have one question." He steepled his fingers and stared at her. "Why are you here?" Seneca froze for half a breath. I'm sorry? I mean on this team," he clarified. "What do you bring to this table that justifies your salary? Enlighten us." A few chuckles cracked around the room. The managing director across from Thatcher leaned forward, grinning like this was normal. Seneca straightened. "I believe my model gives us a clearer picture of risk corridors across sectors that are currently—" "Oh, stop," Thatcher said, raising a hand like a cop halting traffic. "God, you sound like a Bloomberg transcript. Just talk like a human. You know what? Let me help." He clicked something on his remote. Her slide vanished, replaced with a red-screen PowerPoint title, "Unfit for Client Review." The font was huge, aggressively so. Laughter. Not everyone, but enough to fill the silence with sharpness. Seneca stared at the screen, her face expressionless, eyes holding. Thatcher stood and began pacing. "Now," he continued, gesturing like a TEDx speaker, "let's talk about what happens when we hand over deliverables to someone who still confuses correlation with causation. This here," he waved at the screen, "this is what we get. A 6-slide thesis on optimism." Seneca's voice cracked slightly as she tried to speak. "That version wasn't meant to what?" he snapped, turning on her. "Be seen? Be judged? Welcome to finance, sweetheart. If you want safety, go teach kindergarten." Someone covered a smile with a cough. Another turned to their coffee. The head of HR didn't blink. They all watched her, but no one spoke. The room was Thatcher's theater, and she was tonight's tragedy. "Resume," he barked. The slide changed back, but the damage had already taken root. Seneca finished her presentation in under 4 minutes, voice flat, fingers trembling only slightly. When she sat back down, her breathing was even but shallow, her palms pressed to her skirt beneath the table. The meeting rolled on. Numbers were discussed. Error code, clearance level changed. At first, she thought it was a technical glitch. She flagged IT, who showed up with clipboard-ready indifference. One of them, a man named Jorge who never made eye contact, confirmed it in under 5 minutes. "Looks like you've been moved off the Everlock drive," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Permission's been pulled." Directive came from Finance Senior Ops. Seneca stared at him. "I'm Finance Senior Ops," she said, voice controlled. Jorge simply shrugged and packed up his tablet. "Sorry." He walked off, leaving her in the silence that felt too loud. Moments later, an all-team memo landed in her inbox. It detailed new assignments for the Everlock M&A model. Her name wasn't listed. No explanation, no context, just a quiet exclusion executed with bureaucratic precision. She read the email 3 times, willing it to change. Then she saw the name that replaced hers. Connor Vess, a second-year analyst, who once asked her if EBITDA meant estimated budgets in dollars and thousands. The same Connor who had texted her a week ago begging for help with variance modeling. She walked straight to Thatcher Vale's office. The door was open, which was always a trap. If you stepped in, it meant you had the audacity to interrupt him. If you hesitated, it meant you lacked initiative. She stepped in. "I need clarity on the Everlock project reassignment," she said, keeping her tone neutral. Thatcher didn't look up from his monitor. "No clarity needed," he said casually. "You've been cycled off." "I wasn't notified," she said. "My models are at the center of the presentation. I should at least be allowed to." "Seneca," he cut in, his eyes still on his screen. "We don't have the bandwidth to train and babysit at the same time. We need execution right now, not education." She blinked. Execution was exactly what I delivered. He leaned back in his chair, finally meeting her eyes. "Let's not make this emotional. We're shifting resources to the people who know how to sprint, not stumble." "I wasn't stumbling," she replied, the edge in her voice sharper now. "The boardroom mockery yesterday wasn't performance-related. It was targeted." Thatcher grinned faintly, the way someone might smile when they spot a fly on the window and don't intend to shoo it away. "If it makes you feel better to frame it that way, by all means. But my job is to protect this firm from exposure. You had a 36-page model with exactly 0 convincing justification for a buy-side overreach. I shouldn't have had to clean it up." She froze. "You edited my model?" He turned his monitor toward her. There it was, her spreadsheet restructured, mangled beyond recognition. Whole sections deleted. Risk zones shifted. Sensitivity analysis collapsed into a simple bar chart. It was unrecognizable. "I fixed it," he said. "You're welcome." That afternoon, an email was sent to the board and senior team. Subject: Updated analysis, Ray draft corrected. The attachment was the altered document. In the body, Thatcher had written, "Took a bit of late-night tree-off, but we caught it before disaster. Recommend circulating this version going forward." Seneca felt the floor beneath her tilt again. Her original draft was gone, her voice deleted. But worse than being erased was being rewritten, made to look incompetent. She stared at the email header, her fingers frozen above the keyboard, uncertain whether to respond, deny, or say nothing at all. In her gut, she already knew the options weren't real. There was only one rule in Thatcher Vale's kingdom: don't make him look bad. She stood up to get air, pacing slowly down the corridor of frosted glass offices. Everywhere she turned, her coworkers avoided her eyes. Some tapped furiously on keyboards. Others picked up fake phone calls. She could feel their relief, the kind that only comes when the target isn't you. In the women's restroom, she locked the last stall and sat down on the closed lid. Her hands shook. The pressure, the anger, the helplessness, it surged and then imploded, leaving her hollow. She didn't cry, not because she didn't want to. She stepped out onto the 58th floor, where the client event was already in motion. The reception area had been transformed into a gleaming mini-stage, complete with spotlights, mounted screens, and a semicircle of leather chairs for presenting executives. Thatcher stood off to the side, deep in conversation with a hedge fund CEO, his hand resting on the man's shoulder like a brand. He didn't look at Seneca as she walked past him, but she knew he'd seen her. He had orchestrated the entire lineup. The agenda was tight, 10-minute segments from each department, followed by a joint panel. Her portion was slotted between two senior partners, a perfect wedge that would give the illusion she was part of the inner circle without giving her any real leverage. She took her place behind the podium, clicked her presentation into place, and waited for her cue. The room was packed. Senior investors, external consultants, and board advisors filled the rows. The lights dimmed slightly as the projector lit up, casting her first slide across the massive screen. She steadied her breath and began. Good morning. In examining the sector-specific volatility across Q4 and Q1 projections, hold up. Thatcher's voice rang out before she could finish her sentence. Sorry, I need to pause you right there. The entire room turned. Thatcher stepped forward from the side of the stage, a wireless mic in hand. The tone of his interruption calculated to seem casual, but layered with condescension. Let's try that again, he said, smiling like a game show host. This time, pretend you belong here. A ripple of awkward chuckles passed through the audience. Seneca froze, her fingers still resting on the edge of the podium. Her mic had gone dead. She tapped it once. No sound. She looked to the AV tech in the corner, who shrugged helplessly. She was silenced, literally and figuratively, and everyone was watching. Thatcher took 3 steps up to the stage and turned to face the crowd. Apologies. Sometimes the feedback loop in our microphones reflects the kind of feedback we're still ironing out in our internal teams. More laughter. This time, freer, looser. Seneca's face remained still, her body motionless, though her mind screamed. Thatcher clicked his own remote, jumping 3 slides ahead in her deck. Now here's the part that matters, he continued, gesturing to the screen where her impact analysis had been cropped to a single chart with no context. What we really want to highlight is the regression floor and liquidity threshold, basically, the stuff that keeps the ship afloat. Seneca's full analysis, detailing client-side risk hedging strategies, international currency drag, and supplier-side valuation risks, was erased with the flip of his thumb. He spoke over it like it had never existed. Anyway, that's enough of a detour, he said, closing her segment entirely. Let's get back to real analysis. The words dropped like a hammer. Her 10-minute slot was ended in 40 seconds. She didn't speak again. She wasn't invited to. She stepped down from the platform and retreated to the back corner of the room, her heart pounding behind her ribs like it was trying to escape. Her throat was tight. Her hands ached from how tightly they were clenched. She stood there, half-shadowed, as the rest of the presentation unfolded without her. After the event, she moved quickly toward the exit, only to be intercepted by Mitchell Lang, a mid-tier managing director with the social finesse of a damp paper towel. "Hey," he said, awkwardly scratching the back of his neck. "Rough luck up there. But listen, it's just how Thatcher operates. He's an equal opportunity asshole, you know." Seneca gave a tight smile and tried to keep walking, but he blocked her path with a hesitant laugh. "You gotta learn to take a hit and keep going. That's what the real players do." She walked around him without a word. She didn't trust herself to speak. In the elevator back to her floor, she finally exhaled. The descent felt like free fall. When she reached her desk, her phone buzzed. A message from the company's internal chat system. From T. Veil subject. Re. Presentation notes, great job today. Managed to salvage it before it got too academic. We'll workshop the next one. Beneath the message was a link to a trimmed video clip from the event. Just Thatcher speaking, her part entirely erased. It had been sent to the firm's media team for posting on social channels. Her face didn't appear once. She stared at the message, then closed the app. Her breathing had returned to normal, but her chest still felt tight. She opened her original slides, staring at them as if looking for something. Proof, perhaps, that it hadn't all been in her head. But there was no vindication, no relief, only the cold realization that her voice had been stolen in front of the very people she was told to impress. Over the next few days, whispers followed her everywhere. Not mockery, worse than that. It had been 4 days since the event, and she still hadn't spoken more than a sentence to anyone outside of her team. Every hallway interaction now carried an undercurrent of something unspoken. Co-workers nodding too politely, glancing too quickly away. It wasn't pity anymore. It was suspicion. That morning, she'd logged in to find her access to several shared folders restricted. At first, she assumed IT was updating permissions, a standard shuffle that happened after major presentations. But when she clicked into her private drive and got the same denial prompt, something twisted in her gut. Then, just before lunch, a pop-up from the company's internal compliance software interrupted her screen. System alert. Your device has been flagged for review under Carnelian's Confidential Data Protection Act. Please remain at your station and await IT guidance. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard. A quick glance to the other side of the floor confirmed it. No one else had that same alert. Her heart dropped. Within minutes, a pair of IT staffers, one in a gray polo shirt and another with a company-issued badge clipped to his belt, arrived with blank expressions and an air of protocol. MS. Ray, one said, not bothering to sit. We need to mirror your drive and run a compliance diagnostic. You've been flagged for potential data routing inconsistencies. Inconsistencies, she repeated, stunned. What does that even mean? It means we need to determine if there was an external transfer of restricted documents outside of secure channels, he replied. Too practiced to be casual. Probably just a false flag. Happens all the time. But it didn't. She'd been at Carnelian Capital for nearly a year. These things didn't happen all the time, and certainly not without a trigger. She opened her mouth to ask who authorized it, but stopped herself. Asking wouldn't change anything. They took her laptop, assured her a loaner would be issued by end of day, and left without saying anything else. Within minutes, whispers bloomed around the office. People noticed the empty space on her desk. They noticed the closed laptop. The eyes came next, brief, speculative, a few too long to be innocent. She sat quietly, staring at her phone, scrolling through news she couldn't absorb. Then, at precisely 2:07 p.m., she received an email from HR with the subject line, Formal Employee Behavior Notice, Level 1 Conduct Concern. Her stomach turned before she even clicked it open. The message was sterile, emotionless. It outlined that multiple internal reports had raised concerns about her tone during team interactions, disruptive communication patterns, and perceived defensiveness in collaborative settings. It stated that, while no specific incident had been cited as aggressive or inappropriate, the combination of observations required a documented warning. It wasn't just a slap on the wrist, it was the beginning of a file, a black mark, something they could cite later if they ever needed to justify pushing her out. Seneca stared at the screen. Her hands began to tremble, not with fear, but with rage. She knew exactly where this came from. It wasn't anonymous. It wasn't procedural. It was Thatcher. He was laying the groundwork. Discredit her. Paint her as unstable. Make her a liability. He couldn't humiliate her again publicly without it seeming deliberate. So now he would do it slowly, quietly, institutionally. The next day, she confronted her direct supervisor, a woman named Chelsea Arndale, who had always walked the tightrope between ally and survivor. Chelsea didn't look up from her laptop when Seneca asked if she'd seen the HR memo. I saw it, Chelsea said flatly. And did you? Seneca hesitated, struggling to keep her tone level. Did you report me? I filled out a behavior log when requested, Chelsea answered, finally looking up. That's different from reporting. It's a compliance thing. We're required to participate. Required by who? By senior leadership, she said quietly. It came from Vale's office. Seneca nodded slowly, biting the inside of her cheek until she tasted blood. And what did you say in the log? That you were frustrated. That your tone was sharp after the client event. That you seemed rattled. Was I wrong to be? Chelsea didn't answer. She just looked away. That was all the confirmation Seneca needed. Later that night, after everyone else had left, Seneca sat alone at her desk, staring at the city lights through the glass wall beside her. He wore a carnelian hoodie, chewing gum with the carelessness of someone who believed in his immunity to consequence. Seneca stared at him. "What's this?" she asked. Drew looked up, clearly rehearsed. "Hey, I'm shadowing you this week. For, review support and team continuity stuff. You know, quality assurance." Her breath caught in her throat, but she didn't respond. She turned and walked to Chelsea Arndale's office. "Why is there a junior analyst sitting at my desk?" she asked bluntly. Chelsea didn't flinch. "He's there to assist. Mr. Vale wants an extra set of eyes on some of the market projection reports, just for safety." "Safety," Seneca echoed. "Or surveillance." "I don't have control over executive requests," Chelsea said without apology. "Just work with him. Make it look collaborative. He's not qualified to review anything I build." "Then you'll shine by comparison," Chelsea replied, returning to her emails like the conversation was over. Back at her desk, Seneca opened her most recent macroeconomic impact model and began entering data. Drew leaned in after 10 minutes. "Hey, just to be sure, is your inflation adjustment using a chain CPI or standard?" She turned slowly, studying him. "You don't know the difference?" "Just double-checking," he said, typing into his notes. Over the course of the day, he asked at least 15 similar questions, some valid but basic, others clearly fed to him from someone else. He made a point of repeating her answers out loud, occasionally saying things like, "I'll flag that," even when the input was correct. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't even clever. It was a performance, and the audience was watching from behind closed doors. By midweek, Drew had printed out her latest forecast packet and asked if he should run it by Thatcher for calibration. Seneca didn't answer. She simply took the pages back from his hand, folded them neatly, and walked away. She knew she had no power to stop what was happening. Not yet. On Thursday, they were called into a closed-door review session with senior staff. Not quite a boardroom, but close enough to count. Around the rectangular table sat department heads, risk officers, and a few invited external consultants evaluating the firm's exposure heading into Q3. Seneca had been told she would present her updated Latin American market impact study, a model she had refined over 3 weeks. It was flawless, triple-checked, peer-reviewed by a third-party consultant she'd reached out to personally. Her numbers were bulletproof. She stepped forward with confidence, sliding her USB into the console. Today's model integrates fiscal policy trends in Argentina and currency volatility across Brazil, capturing a projected risk curve that, hold on, Thatcher Vale interrupted from across the table, fingers steepled, mouth twitching like he was barely suppressing a laugh. "Before we dive into all that, Drew, did you get a look at this?" Drew, seated 2 seats away with a thick packet of notes, flipped to a tab and nodded. "I did. Ran through the numbers last night." Thatcher smiled, his voice casual but razor-sharp. "And did anything jump out at you?" Drew looked directly at Seneca, hesitating just long enough to create doubt. "I had a few questions about her use of cross-rate elasticity. It seemed high for the Brazilian spread, though maybe I just misread the assumptions." Seneca kept her tone even. The assumptions were based on the IMF's June forecasts and corroborated by Blackridge Capital's sovereign analysis, which I cited in the appendix. Sure, Thatcher said, waving dismissively. "But it's still aggressive, don't you think? Risk can't be all that optimistic unless you're working with magic." A few chuckles echoed around the table. Seneca glanced down, keeping her face neutral. She knew if she pushed too hard, they'd label her defensive. Too quiet, and she'd seem complicit in her own marginalization. The numbers are aggressive because the region's recent policy shifts support capital repatriation. It's not guesswork. It's data. Thatcher leaned back in his chair, gesturing to the screen. "You're really trying," he said with a smirk. "That's cute." The room went still. The words hung in the air like a slap. No one spoke. Seneca Ray returned to work the next day with a practiced calm etched across her face, but something in her had shifted. The humiliation from the review session had struck a deeper nerve than even she had anticipated, not just because it was public or cruel, but because it was so perfectly orchestrated to appear harmless to anyone not paying attention. Thatcher's jab had been calculated, and she saw now that everything about this campaign against her had been coldly strategic, not emotional, not impulsive, just efficient elimination of what he perceived as an inconvenient variable in his perfect equation of control. As she sat down at her desk that morning, she noticed a new calendar invite flashing on her screen. It was for a series of internal finance alignment meetings. A closer look revealed that every client briefing she was scheduled for had been removed from her calendar, replaced with redundant internal operations reviews, workflow evaluations, and spreadsheet audits that had nothing to do with her core responsibilities. She clicked into her email to find a short message from HR. "Hi Seneca, we've shifted some of your focus areas temporarily to better align with departmental needs. You'll be partnering with internal compliance and reporting through the next 2 cycles. Let us know if you need support. Best, Dana." Temporarily was HR's favorite lie, a word they used the way a magician uses sleight of hand, to make you believe what you're seeing isn't really the trap it is. She opened another browser window to compare staffing schedules. It didn't take long to confirm it. Every other analyst in her tier, including those with half her tenure and none of her credentials, were still on client-side projects. She was the only one who had been shifted to internal-only roles. By mid-morning, her suspicion was confirmed. An overheard conversation between 2 associates near the break room. "Yeah, Vale said she's better suited for back-end work, too theoretical for client floors." The words stung more than she expected. She wasn't just being marginalized now. She was being reframed as someone not fit for external representation. Thatcher was building a case to box her out entirely. Later that week, Carnelian Capital held its semi-annual executive retreat, an event meant to combine strategic planning with team bonding, usually held at an off-site luxury venue. This time, it was a private estate 2 hours north of the city. White walls, open gardens, and long glass corridors overlooking the river. Everyone important was expected to attend, and Seneca, though newly invisible, was still considered senior enough to be included. The agenda was what she expected: workshops, vision statements, informal mixers. The real business happened at the informal gatherings, where alliances were shaped not by data, but by golf scores and wine preferences. Seneca kept to herself, spoke when spoken to, and made sure every sentence she uttered was perfectly calibrated, professional, inoffensive, and safe. It wasn't until the second night, after dinner, that the real damage was done. The group had gathered in the estate's great room, an open space with leather couches, a roaring fireplace, and glasses of scotch passed out like candy. Thatcher stood at the center, glass in hand, wearing a cardigan over his collared shirt like the son of a yacht club patriarch. "All right," he said, tapping his glass with a fork, "before we all get too drunk to remember our titles, let's have a little fun. It's game time." A few groans and cheers filled the room. The more junior staff looked nervous, the senior partners amused. "Performance roulette," Thatcher declared. "Anonymous votes. We pull names and categories. It's all in good fun. No egos, no lawsuits." Laughter echoed. A whiteboard was brought out. Slips of paper were handed around. Someone passed Seneca a marker. She looked at it and hesitated. "Let's start easy," Thatcher said, grinning. "Most likely to land a client by smiling alone." Laughter. A few names tossed out. A male partner named Wyatt won the round. Then another, most likely to fall asleep during a quarterly review. Chuckles. Another partner, Jason, took that one. "All right," Thatcher said, eyes glinting. "Let's get a little spicy. Most likely to be reassigned by end of quarter." A few groans. Nervous laughter. "Come on," Thatcher said, feigning innocence. "It's a joke." Slips were passed. Markers scratched on paper. Seneca felt every second tick like a drip of cold water. She didn't write anything. Her fingers curled tightly around the marker. "Let's see." Thatcher unfolded the votes. "Wow," he said, drawing out the word like he was announcing a raffle winner. "Consensus here." He flipped the card. "Seneca." The room went quiet for a beat, then someone laughed, too loud, too forced. More laughter followed, hesitant at first, then rolling. Seneca smiled. She had to. Not because she found it funny, but because if she didn't, if she even flinched, they would call her sensitive, call her angry, call her difficult. And if she spoke up, they would say she was overreacting. So she smiled perfectly and nodded like she wasn't being eviscerated. Thatcher raised his glass. All in fun, of course. She raised hers, barely sipping. The warmth from the fire didn't touch her skin. It wasn't until 2 hours later, alone in her room, that she sat on the edge of the bed and let the mask slip. Her hands trembled. Her face was numb. She replayed the moment again and again in her mind. His tone, the crowd's laughter, the way no one had even hesitated to write her name. She wasn't being evaluated anymore. She was being erased, one smile at a time. They had done everything they could to reduce her, to box her in, to transform her into something silent and disposable. And they had almost succeeded. Almost. But Seneca had never been one to move without understanding the full board. For weeks now, she'd been watching, documenting, connecting the threads between the attacks. And now it was time to move in silence, the same way they had moved against her. Her first step was the call she delayed for over a year. She took it on a cloudy Thursday afternoon, sitting in a quiet corner of the building's unused 46th floor conference suite. The name on her phone read, "Only," a Pierce. When the line connected, the voice on the other end cracked slightly, aged by grief and time. "Seneca." "Hi, Aunt Alma," she said quietly. "I need to talk." Alma Pierce was not her biological aunt, but she had been her second mother for most of Seneca's life. She was also the widow of Nathaniel Pierce, the founder of Carnelian Capital. Nathaniel, the mythic figure whose face still hung in every hallway of the firm, had built Carnelian from the ground up after leaving a legacy investment house in 1985. He had mentored generations, written textbooks, and defined the company's moral compass until his death 3 years prior. What most people didn't know, what Thatcher Vale had never cared to ask, was that Seneca Ray was Nathaniel Pierce's goddaughter, named in the Pierce Family Trust with a unique clause, a minority proxy share in Class A voting rights until she turned 35. Not enough to control decisions, but enough to call for a motion under extraordinary conditions. She had never used that right, until now. In her conversation with Alma, she outlined what had happened, methodically, factually, as if presenting to a boardroom. She detailed the public humiliations, the shifting of responsibilities, the HR manipulations, the shadowing, the whisper campaign. Alma listened without interrupting. When Seneca finished, Alma's voice was low but sharp. "It's time," she said. Nathaniel never trusted that man. He called him a peacock in war paint, thought he knew the cost of loyalty, but only understood the value of currency. That night, Seneca reached out to the only lawyer she trusted, Dominique Laird, a quiet but lethal corporate attorney based in Boston, known for litigation so precise it never had to see a courtroom. Dominique reviewed the documents Seneca had compiled, the emails, the altered reports, the internal memos, the meeting recordings, the anonymous feedback logs, everything. Within 72 hours, Dominique had built a strategy that was part legal preparation, part tactical operation. "You're not just filing complaint," she told Seneca over a secure video call. "You're staging a boardroom coup. And if you're going to do that, you need to do it flawlessly." Seneca agreed. They began to map the timeline. Every instance of Thatcher's manipulation was indexed. Every email in which he referenced her incompetence or suggested she learn how to play the game was compiled. Every moment he had used the firm's power to weaponize its processes against her became a tile in the mosaic of a larger pattern: abuse of authority, systemic harassment, and financial misrepresentation. Because what had once seemed like petty cruelty had a darker undercurrent. In 2 of the documents Seneca recovered from an old team share drive, Thatcher had marked internal valuation figures inconsistent with the final reported data. One small enough to dismiss, the other large enough to suggest fraud if presented without context. Dominique zeroed in on those immediately. "This is the lever," she said. It's not just about what he did to you. It's what he did to cover it up. By the end of the week, Dominique had filed a formal whistleblower notice under a sealed alias to the SEC, outlining inconsistencies in Thatcher Vale's financial reporting history. The evidence was still circumstantial, but enough to warrant a soft probe. Simultaneously, Dominique drafted a private letter addressed to Carnelian Capital's board chair and legal counsel, invoking the trust clause under Section 3B of the Pierce Charter, requesting a special review of Vale's conduct. The letter was signed not by Dominique but by Seneca, using her formal title as beneficiary proxy of the Nathaniel R. Pierce Trust. And with that, everything changed. Within 2 days, she received a cryptic reply. No details, just confirmation. The board had received her letter. A review was underway. HR summoned her for a closed-door meeting to clarify her intent. And Seneca walked in not as the isolated analyst clinging to her job, but as a silent storm prepared to dismantle the structure around her. She said very little, just enough. Enough for them to know the tides had shifted. Enough to make them nervous. By the next Monday, the atmosphere inside Carnelian Capital had changed. There were whispers again, but this time they were about her, only now tinged with confusion, curiosity, even fear. People noticed that Thatcher had canceled 3 standing meetings, that he had left the office early, that a compliance officer from corporate headquarters had been spotted on the 50th floor. Seneca didn't gloat. She didn't change her behavior. The seats around the table were assigned long before anyone arrived, placards printed with embossed names and title initials. CFO, COO, GC, lead partner. The head of the table, as always, belonged to Thatcher Vale. But this time, there was an extra placard, unmarked. And at 8:59 a.m., 1 minute before the doors were set to close, Seneca Ray walked into the room. Heads turned, confusion rippling outward like a dropped stone. She wasn't on the agenda. She wasn't on the distribution list. She wasn't supposed to be here. Thatcher Vale's face barely masked his irritation. "This is a closed session," he said, voice tight. "You've clearly misread the 'I'm here as the registered proxy for the Nathaniel R. Pierce Trust,'" Seneca replied, her tone firm but even. She reached into her briefcase and placed a single folder on the table. As outlined in the firm's foundational charter, Article 6, Section 3B, I have voting and observation rights for matters of strategic compliance, ethics, and executive conduct. There was a pause, the kind of silence that doesn't come from uncertainty, but from calculated recalibration. At the far end of the table, Board Chairwoman Rena Calder exchanged a look with the General Counsel. After a moment, she gave a small nod. "Let her speak," she said simply. Thatcher leaned back in his chair, his smile thin and forced. "By all means," he said, gesturing mockingly toward the open space beside him. "Do enlighten us." Seneca sat down, opening the folder and distributing copies down both sides of the table with slow, deliberate precision. Each document was tabbed, time-stamped, and indexed. "What you're about to review is a compilation of misconduct conducted by CFO Thatcher Vale," she began. "It includes coordinated harassment, abuse of procedural authority, retaliation, fraudulent edits to financial reports, and systemic attempts to discredit and silence an internal whistleblower, myself." Someone at the table coughed quietly. Others leaned in. She clicked her remote. The screen behind her lit up. Exhibit A, meeting transcript from April 11th. Mr. Vale altered a peer-reviewed valuation model and submitted it to the board as corrected work without citation or transparency. His edits lowered forecasted risks to push through the Everlock acquisition timeline, misrepresenting actual volatility exposure by over 20%. The slide changed. Exhibit B, an HR log submitted under anonymous directive, now traced back to Mr. Vale's assistant, based on a draft located in his personal document cache. It falsely cites me for behavioral disruption 2 days after I raised internal concerns about data misrepresentation. Slide after slide, Seneca laid out the case, not just of character assassination, but of calculated corporate sabotage. She played a short audio clip next. Thatcher's voice was unmistakable. "She's too academic. Doesn't know how to play the real game. I'll push her out before she ever gets near the floor again." No one spoke. No one laughed. Thatcher tried to interject, but Rena raised a hand. "You'll have time for a statement," she said without looking at him. Seneca continued. Exhibit F. Discrepancies between internal forecasting models and what was reported to regulatory auditors. The difference is small enough to appear like strategic optimism, but over time it creates a pattern that meets the SEC's threshold for inquiry. The final slide was her email, a detailed timeline of every interaction, every exclusion, every public humiliation, each one linked to the next like stepping stones across a chasm. "This isn't just about personal retaliation," she concluded. "It's about a culture of intimidation that prioritizes optics over ethics, and a leader who manipulated the firm's machinery to protect himself from accountability." She looked across the room, locking eyes with each board member. "You asked for performance. I delivered it. You asked for loyalty. I gave it. And when I raised concerns, I was punished for daring to believe that truth still mattered." She closed the folder. "I am not asking for reinstatement. I am asking for action." The silence afterward was complete. Even the ventilation system seemed to hold its breath. Thatcher finally spoke, voice low and measured. "This is a vendetta cloaked in corporate theater," he said. "You've overstepped, leveraged a legacy clause to smear an executive, and you violated fiduciary trust," Rena interrupted. Her voice wasn't raised, but it cracked like a whip. "We've seen enough. You will be placed on administrative leave pending a formal investigation. Your credentials are revoked effective immediately." The formal vote was held the next morning, and it wasn't even close. 11 votes in favor of immediate termination, 0 opposed. 2 abstained, but not out of loyalty, only because legal counsel had advised silence. Thatcher Vail's contract was severed on the grounds of ethical misconduct, breach of fiduciary responsibility, and retaliatory behavior against a protected stakeholder. His equity stake, once projected to be worth millions upon exit, was clawed back under the firm's moral turpitude clause. His future bonuses, unvested shares, and performance incentives were nullified. And perhaps worst of all for Thatcher, his name was removed from the company's executive history page within hours. The internal memo announcing his departure was short, clinical, and devoid of sentiment. Effective immediately. Thatcher Vail is no longer affiliated with Carnelian Capital. We thank him for his service and wish him well in his future endeavors. It was a corporate obituary. He didn't even get to write his own final email. Security escorted him from the 49th floor just before noon. He didn't fight, didn't shout, but as he passed through the elevator lobby, flanked by 2 HR reps and one visibly uncomfortable intern, he looked back toward the floor with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes, as if trying to convince himself he still had dignity to wear like a jacket. But the building wasn't looking back. It was already forgetting him. What happened next was not just fallout. It was retribution wrapped in compliance. The audit committee, triggered by the evidence Seneca submitted, initiated a forensic review of Thatcher's tenure, particularly the deal flows and reporting patterns linked to Everlock and 2 prior mergers that had raised flags with senior analysts but were buried under so-called executive privilege. The findings came in waves, like distant thunder that kept getting louder. First, they discovered 2 conflicting valuation memos in a hidden directory on the finance server. One memo had been signed and submitted to the board. The other, an earlier draft, showed a $30 million discrepancy in projected liabilities. The signature fields had been altered. Next came the bonus allocations. A separate audit uncovered that Thatcher had pushed through discretionary bonuses to select team members under the guise of retention, but at least 3 of those individuals had no documented performance reviews or client revenue linked to them. One of them, it turned out, was an offshore contractor paid through a consulting firm in the Caymans. The payments were routed through layered LLCs. It took the audit team another day to confirm it. The account was tied to an entity partially owned by Thatcher Vail himself. What began as a personnel investigation escalated into a federal matter. By the end of the week, the company's legal department had filed a confidential report with the Department of Justice and forwarded findings to the SEC's Enforcement Division. A subpoena was issued. The media caught wind. It started with whispers in insider newsletters. CFO exit raises compliance questions at Carnelian. Then came the leaks. Within 72 hours, the headlines hit Bloomberg and Reuters. Carnelian CFO linked to internal probe. Equity clawback raises eyebrows in finance circles. The company went into damage control. The executive team held town halls. They released sanitized statements. They reassured clients that the ship was steady. But internally, everyone knew they were paddling through fire. Clients began calling. Investors wanted explanations. Reputation, that intangible currency so vital to every hedge fund and private equity firm, began to wobble. And amid all of this, Seneca Ray said nothing publicly. She didn't grant interviews, didn't gloat. She simply continued her work, moving through the building with quiet authority. A few brave employees began stopping by her desk, not to pity her, but to ask questions, to offer support, to admit they'd seen what was happening and hadn't known how to intervene. She nodded, accepted their words without resentment, and kept building. Because the truth was, she hadn't done this for revenge. Not really. She had done it because no one else had. Because too many people had looked away, while one man used the power of a billion-dollar institution to grind down a single voice. Because silence had almost killed her. Almost. At the end of the quarter, the board issued a follow-up memo. It was titled Ethics and Accountability Review. It named Thatcher Vale specifically. It acknowledged systemic failures. It promised change. And for once, the promise wasn't hollow. The firm began revising its harassment protocols. In the weeks following the scandal, the atmosphere at Carnelian Capital had shifted in ways no one could have predicted. The whisper networks had quieted, the performative smiles replaced by introspection, and the once untouchable hierarchy showed visible cracks. Gone was the fear-soaked energy that had choked the corridors like invisible smoke. In its place, a cautious breath of reform had begun to circulate. The newly formed Ethics and Integrity Council met twice weekly. Its members a blend of executives, mid-level managers, and newly empowered associates. At its helm, co-chair Seneca Ray sat not as a token of restoration, but as the architect of accountability. Her presence in each meeting was a reminder that silence was no longer a safe option for anyone. Her leadership was neither vindictive nor cold. She approached reform with the same meticulous structure she once applied to risk forecasting. Every policy reviewed, every behavior code re-examined, every power dynamic held under the light until no shadows remained. She did not campaign for favor or operate with a chip on her shoulder. She simply did the work, and her colleagues, those who once looked away, began to truly see her. But amid the progress and policy change, a single message arrived that Seneca did not expect. It was a handwritten note, delivered not through company mail, but slipped beneath her office door. The envelope bore no name, only her initials in slanted cursive. Inside, the letter began without pretense. Seneca, I doubt you want to hear from me. Maybe you won't even finish reading this. I wouldn't blame you. But I need to say something, not for closure, not for sympathy, just for the truth. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Thatcher Vale. I was raised to believe control was the only thing that protected a man from chaos. I believed fear earned respect. And I believed if you weren't dominating the room, you were being erased from it. That belief turned into practice, then into strategy, then into instinct. I don't know the exact moment when I stopped seeing people and started seeing only threats to my image. Maybe I never learned to see people at all. What I did to you wasn't just cruel, it was cowardly. I chose you because you were better than me and because I couldn't stand that you didn't grovel to be seen. I thought crushing you would protect my relevance. All I did was expose my decay. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I wouldn't know what to do with it. But I am sorry. Deeply. I hope that means something, even if it means nothing at all. There was no signature, just his initials, TV, and a postscript. I'm trying to learn how to be quiet now, to listen, finally. Seneca sat with the letter in her hand for several minutes before she moved. She didn't cry. She didn't tear it up. She folded it neatly and placed it in the bottom drawer of her desk, under a copy of the Pierce Trust Charter. She would respond, eventually, not out of obligation, but because justice, she had come to understand, required more than punishment. It required remembrance. 2 weeks later, she stood at the front of the main atrium for the firm's annual ethics address. The space had been redesigned, no longer a stage above rows of chairs, but a circle where no voice sat above another. Associates, partners, and new hires stood together, shoulder to shoulder. Seneca looked across the room and began. "I don't have a story you haven't already read," she said. "My name's been in enough emails, enough whispers, enough boardroom notes. So I won't talk about what was done to me. I want to talk about what we let happen here." She paused, scanning the room. We built a place where power meant silence, where excellence was punished if it made someone uncomfortable, where people measured leadership not by integrity, but by who could humiliate others most efficiently. Another pause. No one looked away. We cannot heal what we refuse to confront. And we cannot pretend that culture is neutral. It is never neutral. It is either just or it is complicit. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It carried with the weight of everything she had endured and everything she still stood for. When I came here, I thought I had to become invisible to survive. I thought I had to smile through being erased. But the truth is, I wasn't a problem. The system was. And systems don't change because we wait. They change because someone forces the reckoning. There were no claps yet, no applause, just silence. The good kind. The kind where people are actually listening. This committee isn't about policing. It's about building. It's about making sure the next Seneca doesn't have to weaponize her silence to be heard. It's about making truth a habit, not a crisis. She took a breath. And it's about remembering what we owe each other. Her final words were slow, deliberate. Justice isn't revenge. It's remembering what we owe each other. Then the applause came, not thunderous, but steady, respectful, real. Seneca didn't smile for their approval. She smiled for the future, for the interns who had watched her rise from the ashes of corporate cruelty, for the analysts who would see her not as a warning, but as a blueprint, for every voice that had been silenced, and for the echo of their return. That night, as she left the building and stepped into the cooling dusk of Manhattan, Seneca didn't feel triumphant. She felt purposeful. She had won, yes, but more than that, she had changed the game. And as the firm behind her rebuilt in her image, not perfect, but trying, she knew the work was far from over. But she would be there for every moment of it. Not to take revenge, to remember the end. If you found this story powerful, moving, or thought-provoking, take a moment to hit the like button and consider subscribing for more gripping, character-driven narratives that don't shy away from truth or consequence. I'd love to know what part of this story hit you the hardest, which twist caught you off guard, and where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop a comment below. Let's talk justice, change, and the power of standing up when silence is no longer an option.